Hi, Mom. The story I'm going to read is from the book My Grandfather's Blessings, and it is by Rachel Naomi Remen, who was born in the late 30s. It's from the chapter Becoming a Blessing, and it's kind of the beginning of introduces the rest of the stories in that chapter. And it's a story about her grandfather who died when she was like 7 years old. So she only knew her grandfather for the first 7 years. It's kind of a story about how her grandfather grew and changed through the course of his life. And I'll start. None of us are born wise. The grandfather I knew was an old man. By the time we met, life had burnished him and taught him many things. Before that, he had been young, a brilliant Old Testament scholar, proud of his intellect and his learning, the center of a congregation of devout Orthodox Jews who accepted his teachings as absolutely as the law. He had lived in a world that was black and white, with a clear sense of what was right and what was not. I do not think I would have loved him then. I am not sure that his own children did. My mother once told me about something that had happened when she was a little girl. According to strict Orthodox law, it is forbidden to have graven images, not just in the synagogue, but also in the home. This law extended to dolls, and my mother and her younger sister had never had one. One of the women in the little Russian town in which they lived had taken pity on the two little girls and given my mother a doll as a gift. The doll had a china head, blue eyes, and real yellow hair. It had meant the world to the two little sisters, but their father had discovered it. In a rage, he had taken it and flung it across the room. When it hit the opposite wall, it had broken into 100 pieces. My mother was over 70 when she told me this story. Even then, her eyes had filled with tears. The story of how the family got its American name is also revealing. A few years before the first of the pogroms that swept through Poland and Russia in the early part of the 20th century, my father awoke one night from a dream that disturbed him deeply. Death had reached out a great black wing and extinguished the lights in all the synagogues in Eastern Europe. He knew most of them by name, and he had watched in horror as they were snuffed out one by one. He couldn't get this dream out of his mind, and yet he did not understand it. When a few weeks later he dreamt it a second time, he took it to be a message and a warning. Gathering up his family and his entire congregation, he had immigrated to America. Like so many others, our family was renamed at Ellis Island in New York City. When at last they reached the immigration desk, the man behind it asked my grandfather for his name. My grandfather, sheltered by the respect and tradition that had surrounded him in Russia, had never been addressed in this tone of voice before, and he simply stared at this man. The clerk, thinking that perhaps he had not been understood, asked my grandfather for his name again, and this time in Yiddish, "Was in dein Namen?" which I guess means, "What is your name?" At that time, Yiddish was the language of the uneducated and the women and children. While he understood it well, my grandfather rarely spoke it, and was usually spoken to in Hebrew, the language of God. Offended to the bone, he had simply turned his back. I can see him in my mind's eye standing there, young and outraged, black overcoat, black hat, full black beard, his arms crossed in front of him, and his back to the offending clerk. It is hard to believe that this same man who 40 years later would tell his 5-year-old granddaughter that it is a great offense, that it is as great a separation from God to take offense as to give offense. Meanwhile, my grandmother Rachel, herself a young woman, was trying to calm her 6 frightened children by Meanwhile, my grandmother Rachel, herself a young woman, was trying to calm her 6 small children, frightened by the unfamiliar world around them. She spoke to them soothingly in Yiddish, trying to still their crying and comfort them. "Shh, shh," she told her little ones. "Shey Kinder. This is Kinder," which means hush, hush, beautiful children, sweet children. And so the clerk, getting no further response from my outraged grandfather, had simply said, "Ziskind, next," and my grandfather became Rabbi Ziskind, meaning sweet child, for the rest of his life. It is hard for me to put stories of my grandfather in his youth together with the old man who was the center of my world as a young child, but over time he had grown beyond them. By the time I knew him, he had come to understand that the letter of the law was far less precious than its spirit, that the Spirit of God lived in the soul and not the mind, and that the heart of a little girl who spoke neither Yiddish nor Hebrew could speak to God directly in his own language. Everyone and everything is caught up in the process of manifesting its soul. This struggle of the personality to become transparent to the soul is a struggle to become free from illusion, to grow in wisdom. The process of growing in wisdom, of becoming more transparent to the soul, is going on within us and all around us. This is not usually a graceful or a deliberate process. We stumble forward, often in the dark, using everything to become more of who we are. It is an effort worthy of our patience, our support, our compassion, and our attention. According to those who have returned from a near-death experience, we are all here to grow in wisdom and learn how to love better. As we each do this in our own ways, we slowly become a blessing to those around us and a light in the world. That's it.